I don't have a fleet of traffic. My emissions are low, my mileage is low, so I'm not really impacting. And then I started really getting into it, thinking, well, okay, what is it that I do? Well, building websites, coaching on Zoom, workshops on Zoom, everything online and digital. Well, I'm using the internet. Well, the internet has a physical infrastructure, and that we kind of don't start thinking about it until we do start thinking about it. Those infrastructures where the internet lives are huge, huge, huge data centers. And those data centers use power. They use electricity. They use energy. They're water cooled, most of them. And when I started really looking, you can just Google, world data centers, and you will see these huge, huge infrastructures. Google, for example, has its own huge infrastructures of servers. So that basically, if there was only one thing that we were impacting.
Welcome to the Web Design Business Podcast with your host, Josh Hall, helping you build a web design business that gives you freedom and a lifestyle you love.
Hey friends, so good to have you here for this episode of the podcast. I hope you are having a swell day, no matter where you are in the world. This is a bit of a different episode for the podcast, a bit of a different topic, I should say, because we're going to dive into this idea of going green, specifically as a web designer. Now, I have to be completely honest about this. I was quite ignorant about this topic, not out of any malicious intent, but I always kind of pictured companies that have green initiatives with companies that are like big manufacturers or have really clear environmental impact with pollution and stuff like that. But as I've come to find out, especially after having this conversation that you're about to hear, collectively, there are a lot of things we can do to both promote environmental sustainability and just good things, good principles to do as far as kind of clearing out some waste that we're doing both digitally and like literally with our equipment and things like that too. So the reason I wanted to do this on the podcast is because I often see hosting companies and other agencies and SaaS products say they have green initiatives, but I'm like, how, like, if you're not, dumping pollution into a river, what can we do to be a green company? And that's exactly what we're going to dive into in this conversation. And I can't think of anybody else better to do this with than Adela Mei. She has been on the podcast a couple times before. She's been a student of mine for a long time. She was a founding member of my community, Web Designer Pro, and she actually has a background as an environmentalist, and she has seen some things in person when it comes to environmental impact that I've never seen and probably would never see living in Columbus, Ohio. But she's actually spent time in some of these areas where this is a really big deal. And what's really cool about Adela's perspective on this is that she is an environmentalist who is also a web designer. So she's got a lot of tricks up her sleeves that we're going to dive into here in order to do our part in being as green as possible with our web design business. Even if we're working from home from one computer, we're going to get into digital storage. We're going to get into just practical common sense things like using less paper, recycling equipment if we can, just doing our part to be more sustainable. And as a collective, I think that's pretty cool. I actually learned a lot in this conversation. And again, some of my ignorance was not malicious. I just didn't really think about all this. But when you think about millions of people doing things collectively, particularly when it comes to data storage, that actually translates to big impacts in the real world pretty quickly. So all that and more is covered in this one. Here's Adela. Let's talk about how we can be a green web design business. And side note, we recently in episode 301 had a topic about getting grant funding for your web design business. If you have a green initiative, that is one extra step that puts you in the running to get some grant funding for your business. So I recommend it. Here's Adela. Well, Adela, so good to see you again. Back on the podcast. Been a while since we caught up. And we're going to dive into a topic that's very different for the podcast. Green web design. So
Green.
I actually would love to start off with your background, because I think that is really important for the foundation to this, because this topic, I mean, obviously it's very personal to you. You come from, well, yeah, just share us a bit about your background, which I'm sure will segue into why you're so
Sure.
passionate about this.
Yeah, sure. It's funny because the first podcast we did, I was just coming out of being very absorbed in the environmental sector. And that's how I ended up in web design. And now I've come out of web design back into the environmental sector. So it's like this full circle journey, which is fantastic. So I was always brought up really connected with the environment, with nature. We were out all of the time. I mean, I'm Gen X. We didn't have a TV till, I was over 10. So we were like out in nature. And I don't know if you're a fan of David Attenborough, but over here I'm in the UK, he was like our idol, or his nature programs and everything he was doing, I was just obsessed. So I finally found my way back to university when I was 25, actually. I had a misspent youth, as I think many of us did. I found ecology and conservation, and it just grabbed me. It's the study of the interconnectedness of all things, how everything works together in a system, how we're not separate, how literally everything affects everything else. And I was just absolutely blown away by the subject. I ended up doing postgrad and then ended up out in the Amazon. And I think we might have mentioned this before. I was building websites on a laptop, Dell Latitude, literally in the Amazon jungle for my research for a master's thesis. And we were using front page in those days. I don't know if you ever had to do that.
I was after. I started in Dreamweaver, so I was right after front
just
page.
A little bit before that. So we're building these sites literally in these rainforest lodges, and then going up to the town to upload the new content to the internet on dial-up. I mean, it was time consuming. It really was.
I was going to say, I feel like the Wi-Fi, in those regions is probably terrible still today, or non-existent. So back then I can only imagine.
I know. I mean, I think a lot of it is satellites, but even so. So I ended up in corporate when I dragged myself out of the rainforest after quite a few years actually of researching out there. To be honest, some of the things I saw really broke my heart, talking about saving the planet and sustainability. I witnessed, clear felling of rainforest, trade in endangered species, gold mining, like all the things you kind of see on the news, but you can't really fathom until you really see it. And it's something most people would never see. I was very privileged being a researcher to access some really quite remote areas of, the Amazon basin. So came out to the UK thinking, okay, we do really need to do something. Now, this was like 20 years ago, Josh. 20 years, I was still on this, on this soapbox. And then going through corporate, I was doing a lot of pollution kind of management for rivers. I was doing biodiversity work. And I ended up very much in the world of environmental management systems, which sounds very complicated. It can be complicated. But really, that's now what I'm doing with most of my clients to help them build sustainable business. So we build environmental management systems, which is a long way to just say action plans and policies to help you green your business and be more sustainable. So in a nutshell, that's really what I'm doing now.
So I have to address the question that's probably the elephant in the room, and it's not out of anything against this. It's more of just ignorance, but I'm sure a lot of people wonder, as a web designer, how am I affecting the environment if I'm just building websites on my laptop? So what's again, more out of ignorance. So what's your take on that? And how are we as web designers, before we get into like the tactical tips on how to go green? Yeah. Sure. What are your thoughts on that?
Sure. I mean, even myself, so I went 100% online digital through lockdown. I think many of us did, but as web designers, and I know your audience is mainly web designers and graphic designers, we tend to be 100% digital, 100% online, running a home office. And I fell foul of this myself, thinking, well, I'm all right. I don't import. I don't drive everywhere. I don't have a fleet of traffic. My emissions are low. My mileage is low. So I'm not really impacting. And then I started really getting into it, thinking, well, okay, what is it that I do? Well, building websites, coaching on Zoom, workshops on Zoom, everything online and digital. Well, I'm using the internet. Well, the internet has a physical infrastructure, and that we kind of don't start thinking about it until we do start thinking about it. Those infrastructures where the internet lives are huge, huge, huge data centers. And those data centers use power, they use electricity, they use energy, they're water cooled, most of them. And when I started really looking, you can just Google, world data centers, and you will see these huge, huge infrastructures. Google, for example, has its own huge infrastructures of servers. So that basically, if there was only one thing that we were impacting, it would be through the data centers. They're using energy. And of course, it's not like something at home you can turn it on or off on your switch. Servers have to run 24/7. The internet can't go to sleep for a little bit. The whole world is now run on this 24/7 internet, data storage, communications, all of it. So we also need to have these backup generators because we can't lose the internet. I mean, look what happened a few weeks ago when Facebook went down. I think half the world had a breakdown, and it was only for a few minutes, I believe.
Yeah, I missed it. I'd heard about it, but I'm not on socials too much, so it didn't impact me terribly.
I was following it on X, and it caused this huge, people were really, really freaking out. So, I mean, that really, and, in a nutshell, that is the main impact that we have as, web designers or anyone really who's running a mainly digital online business. We sit in our home, we have the things we have. Of course, we're still using electricity in the home to power the computer, the modem, the router. And then we've got these nice big data centers chugging away, keeping us all powered.
What's the alternative, though?
To the internet?
What's the alternative to not working from home? I mean, I imagine of all the industries, I would think that, like you said, we're not in like transportation or, we're not like, we don't have like a factory by a river that we're dumping sludge into. Like when I think of like, when I think of businesses causing environmental harm, immediately my mind goes to something like that, not, me sitting at home on a laptop. So, I mean, kind of tongue in cheek, but like, what's the other alternative to the setup now?
This is how I look at it. I mean, the world is undergoing a digital transformation that is really very, very rapid, like the growth of the internet, the growth of, the digital world. So that's not going anywhere. It's not about stopping using the internet or stopping being online and digital, but it's about sustainable growth with the digital transformation. So how do you do it sustainably? And then the other side is how actually you can use some of this tech to help with sustainability. So there's kind of two sides to the story with that. So
oh, go ahead. Sorry.
As I say, some of the tips that I have just kind of pinpoint, I've just found the 10 main ones, 10 areas that we do have an impact, and then just an action you can take to mitigate that, to help with that. And then it's really about just awareness and understanding what we're doing, what impact we're having. Like that's the first step, is understanding, oh, actually, my business does have an impact. I didn't think that it does. Okay, now let's look at the impact and then let's work out what we're going to do about it. And it's all one step at a time.
So we'll dive into getting practical on this. And again, this is interesting to me because this is brand new territory for me. Again, when I think of any sort of environmental impact, I think of like a plant next to a river with pollution. I don't think about me, on my computer. I do think about paper. Like, my God, the amount of paper I get from whether it's like financial, any sort of like governmental program or taxes or financial, whatever, the amount of like junk paper I get, it's wild. I mean, we're big on recycling, but I imagine a practical thing would be probably less paper, or like just less stuff in general. I mean, I guess you could take that into files and browser tabs, whatever, apps. I mean, is the idea just almost getting back to more minimalistic roots, both digitally and in person? Is that kind of a 101 step to help?
I mean, it is. I mean, we could jump to the end. That ultimately is what we need to be doing. It's the kind of reduce, reuse, recycle kind of principle of, not over consuming. Like, one of the biggest problems is over consuming. I mean, we kind of joked about it in the club at Sumo, being really addicted to just buying apps and apps and apps and having all this stuff, even digital. It's still data, which means it's still taking up space. So it's still having an impact. So it's a lot. I'm into mindset and changing the way we see things. So this is about not over consuming, not doing all the things, not, just not putting everything up in the cloud. We think, I'll keep my computer running fast by throwing all my files in the cloud. Well, that's still being stored somewhere and it's actually still having an impact. I had this idea, it was a few weeks ago, that like, how's Google keeping up with all the websites being built and all the information? And our friend Michelle Bobinier, we were talking about earlier, our SEO gal, she actually sent a newsletter out saying that Google was struggling with keeping up with indexing websites because there's just so many being generated, AI being generated. And it's like, oh my word, like we've gone a little bit over the other way now to just put so much content out on the internet. We think it's not having an impact on the planet, but it is. It's just filling up data centers and data centers.
It's actually a really good reminder that even though something is online, it lives somewhere. This is actually really good for me, just as a general principle to remember if everyone doesn't know. Literally, a file, a website, anything online, an email, it lives somewhere. It's not just on the screen, like it is stored somewhere.
Kind of
so that is a really interesting
out of mind, isn't it? We just think, it's
because we don't have our own. Yeah, because I don't need to like get more servers in my house. I don't even have a server in my house. Like unless you have your own server, it's out of sight, out of mind. The one big problem here, I don't know how the hell you're going to talk to people like this, but the thieves, this is very top of mind for me because I was just talking about this, but the people who rip off courses, who rip off blogs and duplicate content, they are massive culprits to any sort of data storage issues. Case in point, when I was on Pat Flynn's podcast, I Googled it after it went live, and there were probably 15 or 20 duplicate articles that were very similar on these janky sites that had, and actually mentioned Michelle, she was the one who showed me that they had duplicate sites that had versions of my name, but instead of Josh Hall, it was like Josh Corridor or weird names. So these sites are getting duplicated. So, I mean, all that to say, like, this is a huge problem with any sort of site that gains traction. And this could be with AI and ChatGPT as well. The sheer fact of, I guess data centers expanding. And I don't know personally what type of effect those have on the environment. I would imagine, wouldn't that be more on like Google? Wouldn't that be on like Amazon Web Services or Google or wherever these servers are stored to have?
I mean, I think it's in multiple places, but I guess like what just came into my mind is that we need some sort of data police, data regulation to just try and restrict that. Because I can hear people thinking, well, what's the point in me cleaning up my files? I'm just one person, and that it's like a drop in the ocean compared to all of this, But I think for me, with all of this, it's a huge subject, but with all of this, I do my part because I can, and I think it's the moral and ethical thing to do, to try and reduce my personal and business impact on the planet. And I try not to look too much at the bigger corporations and the things that are out of my control, because they have their own regulations. They'll have to do their own, data cleanup, etc. But that's not really in my control. What I can do is try and set a really good example with how I do things and how I run my business, so I can sleep at night. I can say, look, I've done everything I can today. I've done my recycling. I'm good. I've turned my computer off, and then just one step at a time.
That's interesting. I mean, it reminds me a lot of like littering. And my family and I just went out for ice cream last night, and my middle daughter Annie, we were walking out, and this car had pulled away, and there was just like McDonald's trash all over the parking lot. Like they just totally just chucked it out the window. There's a freaking garbage can, like they could have just got out of the car. And I told her, I was like, look what they did. I was like, that is nasty. And I was like, that's called littering. We don't do that. And she's like, oh yeah. And she came in, she's like, Mommy, they littered all over the place. The reason I mentioned that is just because it reminds me of that kind of thing. It's like most people in a community if collectively you don't litter, it's not a problem. It's when some personal responsibility isn't there, then it becomes a problem at large and at scale. So I could see that. This is interesting, Adela, because again, I appreciate your perspective on this because you were in the heart of some real stuff that went on. So you like actually saw things that, again, I wouldn't see in Columbus, Ohio. It's not something I really think about. Like we know the stories, we know the documentaries and everything else, but it is hard to get a feel for any impact we're making when we're not seeing direct things there.
And talking about littering,
I do appreciate this principle. Yeah.
And talking about littering, I think we spoke before, I'm very much involved with sea turtle conservation, and that's a big problem for all of the trash that gets washed up from the oceans that's just dumped, especially the plastic. So I've seen on the beaches, you've got turtles up there laying their eggs, doing their thing, and then you've just got miles and miles and miles of trash that's been washed up, and you see it and you're like, oh, okay, this is real. This is real. And some of it's dumped off ships, some of it's, from the land. But when you see it, like you can't unsee it. So it becomes more important here, reduce the use of plastic, make sure I'm recycling. I'm in a small village. We go out litter picking, we keep stuff, tidy around here. I mean, I can dive into the 10 steps I found.
Let's do that. Yeah, I was just going to say, let's get practical because I think this is a good This is a good foundation, though. I'm glad we hit on some of this because some of this already, I was like, I didn't even think about. I didn't really think about data centers. I didn't really think about all the websites, all the email, all the files, all the storage, all the stuff. I mean, I think about my Google Drive. I guarantee I've got like 75% of video files and stuff in there that I could delete. I don't need to do that. Anyway, that's interesting. So those are good principles with the idea too. Before we dive into these practical tips, one thing I do want to say is I think we all need to collectively remember the internet is not old. Like it's 30 years old. So, imagine, in 300 years, how much data is going to continue to accumulate as we're all online nearly all the time now. So to that foundation, I say, and again, I'm not that I'm skeptical, but I'm playing devil's advocate on some of this and like, what am I doing with my laptop open that's harming something? But that's actually a really good point. So practically, what are some of these tips, Adela? I mean, what are some things we can do initially?
So I'm thinking specifically for, web designers and the audience that would be watching this. So, I mean, I pulled a little bit of data. So the internet's carbon footprint. So what that means is, the emissions and the impact that the internet globally is having. So it accounts for 2 to 4% of global emissions. Now, putting that in context.
Is that data centers?
That's just, the internet's carbon footprint. So data centers.
But I mean, like what? But that would, they'd have to go through the data centers, right? That would be the output of the internet.
So, for comparison, that's equal or more to the entire aviation industry. So just to put it in context, I would sit here thinking, I'm all right, I'm not having an impact. Oh, look at that plane coming over from Bristol Airport. It's the planes. They're the ones doing, the damage. They're the ones with all the emissions. And then you think, actually, the internet is doing more damage, creating more emissions than the entire aviation industry. So just for one, bit of data there. The first thing really, and the most important thing is for web designers to just look at their web hosting. So you said earlier, what's the alternative? So there are web hosting companies who are green. So what makes them green? They run on 100% renewable energy. So that would be solar, wind, etc. Google, actually, I'll I put some links below for this. Google's actually running now on 100% renewable energy because they've got like miles of solar panels up there powering all their servers. So they've actually gone, I think it was last year or the year before, they're now 100% like net zero, meaning they're not producing emissions. They are self-contained sustainable. So that would be
Gotcha.
the aim for bigger companies to do something like that.
Are you proud of me, Adela? Because I'm with SiteGround and they pride themselves on being, this is very timely. I literally just got an email with an update on their green policy.
Good.
Like right before this. So
there's two main ones I've pulled up. So I'm in the UK. So the company I use are Crystal with a K. And I know a lot of your membership use them as well. They were, I've been them for years and years and years. They're UK based. The guy made a commitment right off the bat to be net zero, meaning not have a negative impact on the planet. They've planted over 1 million trees. They're running on 100% renewable energy. If you look at their website, it's basically this like green futuristic vision that we all need the internet, but we don't want to be impacting the planet. So for me, they're like the star child of hosting. The second one would be SiteGround, and I did have a bit of a research through their sustainability, and they're on board. They're getting there. They're a much bigger company than Crystal. Really, they're the two main ones. Anything under the let's call them the bigger umbrella companies will not be running on 100% renewables. They will not have such a commitment to sustainability. So when I'm coaching my clients, the first thing I say to them is, well, it's a quick switch to go to Crystal or SiteGround. It's a quick win to say, right, my website, my hosting is powered by green energy. And it's a nice tick on your action plan to say that you've done something. It's a small thing, but it's an easy thing to do. The next thing would be data storage. So we've touched on that. So short of having, I don't suggest you have your own servers, but just thinking about storage and your files. And I know through one of your courses, you talk about cleaning up your files at the end of migrating a website and just, getting stuff off the computer. Excuse me. You could put stuff on hard drives. But just being mindful when you're building, do you have to keep all of that? Can it be deleted? Can it be put on hard drives? Do you have to put it up into the cloud for storage? And we're paying for that storage most of the time. We're just
I thought of it more of it didn't even cross my mind that, look, how ahead of the curve am I? I was talking about green principles years ago. I was more so like clear your mental bandwidth and clear your computer from overheating, holding onto a bunch of files. But actually, it makes sense. It's just a bunch of extra stuff and clutter. Somebody actually, I think I heard this on a podcast. It's like, if you live in a home for years, you just accumulate stuff. And your computer is the same way. And if you don't actively clean it and do a spring cleaning and clear out even your bookmarks and clear out your files, which this is a great reminder. We're talking in springtime right now to do that, like make that a practice. Sorry, I don't want to derail us, but
it's
just a thought in the process for us.
It's housekeeping. So archiving and moving stuff off, especially videos.
Which, as you mentioned, collectively, if millions of people were to remove a video or two from their computer, that's probably how many servers could that open up kind of thing. So
I have a figure that I can't fathom in my mind. So 330 billion gigabytes of data is produced every day. 330 billion gigabytes of data every day. Half of that's video. Next is social media and then gaming. So those form the top 75% of data storage, social media, gaming, video content.
I was initially thinking we can't be near what the gaming industry is. I mean, those are huge files and we
won't even go into
streaming. Right.
So this one, practical tips would be to avoid, data hoarding, basically, is what it is.
Mm.
App hoarding. And one thing, I mean, this is just what I personally use. There's tools you can have, like Clean My Mac, that you can go through your system. You can clean duplicate files, clear your trash. It will find like your biggest files that you can then move off, or the files that you haven't opened for like over a year, over 2 years, and you can clear that off. So I'm sure there are a lot more, but Clean My Mac's just something that I've used for a long time, and I like it.
I used to use that years ago, and it kind of reminds me of like an iPhone. There's a reason it has storage settings, and you clear your storage out if you're up on your storage.
Yeah, exactly.
Because that's true. I mean, I guess that's why computers have a cap with how much storage is on there. But for most modern computers, like, it's going to take a lot. And unless you're doing video, particularly, it's very unlikely that you're going to get up there with just files and apps. Right. But yeah, video's a culprit for storage, for sure. Absolutely. I know very well.
And then remembering, if we're reducing the data storage, we reduce energy consumption, and we reduce what we're paying out on our energy bills, as another benefit. So the third thing really we've touched on as well is the equipment and hardware. This figure blew my mind. So, and I've put the quotes of, the references where I got this from. So 40 million tons of electrical equipment waste is generated every year. 40 million tons. They've calculated this means, to try and get our heads around it, 800 laptops being thrown away every second. 800 laptops being thrown away every second, just to get an idea of the waste. And a lot of this is unfortunately dumped in landfill in developing countries, which is a whole nother story. So what we can do for that is only buy necessary equipment, recycle the old equipment, fix it if possible. And I know
I was just going to ask, with that, can those be recycled? Old laptops, anything electrical?
Some. So Apple and Microsoft have recycle trade-in schemes. One thing I actually did, I wanted a new iPhone. I went to trade in my old one, and they were offering me such a low price. I decided to keep it and repurpose it as a security camera rather than a phone. So I haven't thrown it away. I didn't trade it in, but I'm repurposing it to use it for something else because it still works fine. I saw a very interesting film about using or training AI robots basically in these huge recycle centers, primarily for Apple devices, phones and tablets. And these bots basically will go in and strip all the devices down to their individual components and then separate them into the different precious metals. And then those metals can then be reused in new products. Because
are these AI robots kicking off worse emissions than a computer? that's my question with some of the tech.
Well, I think I could find the video when it went a lot into depth. The whole plant's probably powered by solar, 100% renewable. I mean, we're talking about very advanced factories here.
Yeah. They built a few. We don't live far from Ohio State University, and we're up there quite a bit with restaurants and stuff. And they just had like a series of new buildings, and they're all they look like landing pads on every building, like it's all solar stuff. Yeah.
Right. And the benefit of this, so for people to do it would be very time consuming, labor intensive, very costly. It's those precious metals in all of our equipment that are mined, and mining is one of the most destructive activities on the planet.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Often in developing countries. Again, we could have a whole podcast just talking about that. It's quite an unpleasant subject. So instead of mining, we want to be pulling out those resources from the equipment that we're not using anymore. It can be reused, these metals.
Yeah, totally.
So there's that side of things. We can reduce, anything going to landfill, reuse, repurpose, recycle as much as possible. I look around and think, well, I've got 2 Macs, 4 keyboards, too many mice. I mean, I have got a lot of kit just for one person. And I think, okay, when I go to buy the next thing, I'm going to really ask myself, do I need that or do I just want it? Especially with, I use mechanical keyboards, the ducky ones, the gaming ones. I mean, you can get very addicted and buy a lot of those because they come in a lot of different colors with backlighting, and that you have to just check in and think, right, do I need that? Do I really need that? Or do I just want it because I want to treat myself to a new gadget? So the next thing will be energy. Oh, and no shame if you collect gadgets. No shame. Just be mindful.
Well, it's also a good reminder to recycle or repurpose if you can, versus just chuck things away.
Yeah,
Or
I mean,
litter.
I actually Googled what can I do with my old iPhone SE, and then there was a whole load of stuff came up, and someone said, "Oh, you can set it up like this and have it as a security camera." I was like, genius, brilliant. So energy usage would be the next one. So most of the energy that we use does come from fossil fuels. So when we talk about reducing emissions, what we're trying to do globally is reduce the amount of coal and gas that we're using. That's basically the aim of the game. Reduce fossil fuel use, increase use of renewable energy. So one thing we can do in the home, or for listeners who've got an agency office or something, is to go onto a green energy tariff with your electrical provider. So in the UK, we actually only have one that's properly 100% renewable. So all their electric is generated from wind, water or solar. Most of the other companies are not 100% green, but kind of semi green. So again, if you're thinking about low hanging fruit, what you can do right now, switch your hosting company to a green one, switch your electrical provider to a green one. Small wins. And it's not often more expensive. My green tariff actually is not more expensive than a standard electricity tariff. My tricky situation here, because I'm very rural, is my heating is run on oil. Like I have an oil tank outside that comes in a pipe for my heating, and there actually isn't anything I can do about that right now. So that's always the balance with things. My electric's green, but my heating absolutely is not. So printing and paper usage, and you mentioned paper before. So I know a lot of us are digital. We don't print. I like to print. I like to write on paper with a pen. I'm old fashioned like that. But we can buy, and I'm sure everyone knows this already, you can buy recycled paper. When you're finished with it, you recycle it. With printing, a lot of the inks now are biodegradable, or you make sure that you recycle those cartridges, you send them back. So HP or Dell, they all take the cartridges back. They'll often give you a little paper envelope. You can just send it back when it's empty. And just checking that, you're printing double-sided if it's just a draft thing, and just being mindful. In my days of corporate, I remember people running off hundreds and hundreds of copies of stuff on printers because they'd forgotten to turn something off, just the waste of it.
Yeah, I mean, imagine before the internet. I know, this is opening my eyes to the data center thing, but my gosh, can you imagine how much paper was through 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s before the internet? My goodness.
Right. And a lot of things
now it's crazy.
Right. A lot of things now you can, digitally sign, which is great, but a lot of companies and corporate are still transitioning from using paper because you need that signature for, legal reasons. I mean, and the thing with reducing paper, always thinking most paper comes from trees, not all paper now, but most paper comes from trees. So we want to be reducing deforestation. That's the aim of the game. So looking at thinking about most of us will be working from a home office and have maybe like a home kitchen. So I always imagine if you're doing your accounts, like we would often put things in there, allowance for home office. So thinking about, and this is a whole nother conversation about food and tea and coffee and milk and sugar and where all of these products and foods come from. But just to in a nutshell, the main things we can do is look for organic and fair trade in whatever we're purchasing. And obviously this applies to personal family life as well. This isn't just for work, but thinking about where is your coffee sourcing from? Where's your milk sourcing from? Where's your tea from? Where's your sugar? These are the real big ones that you want to be looking for fair trade, where workers are paid a fair trade for, like the tea growers in Sri Lanka, for example, coffee growers in Peru. I think most people would have seen this in the store. There's a little organic fair trade certification stamp on things. So small wins.
Now, probably addressing the obvious, but like organic food is way more expensive. I imagine this is globally, but like here, there's a drastic difference. Are you familiar with Whole Foods? Do they have that in the UK?
We have something similar.
Yeah, like we're not too. So yeah, like Whole Foods, the joke with Whole Foods was and I heard the CEO talk about this on a podcast. They used to nickname them Whole Paycheck just because, groceries are insanely expensive with inflation. Organic on top of that is almost 2 to 3x on a lot of those. Even like fruit, like we were looking at organic raspberries and it was like 3 times more expensive. Yeah. Same thing with hosting. I imagine like SiteGround is a little more premium hosting compared to some others. All that to say, one of the tricky things about this is it sounds like in a lot of these areas to go green, aside from some of the basic stuff that we can do with what we have and actually save money by reducing the amount of like storage we're using. I imagine the tricky part of this is like green stuff is expensive. Like the good foods are expensive. The good hosting is more expensive. I don't know if there's anything more to say about that, but I imagine that's one thing that's holding people back from this too. It's like, well, if I'm paying $100 a month in hosting for all my clients, if I go up to $300 a month, I imagine that's a tricky part to this. And I imagine in the environmental sector, it's probably as tricky as well.
It's a really, really tricky part. I mean, how I do it, I think, well, if I go out, do I need to buy that Starbucks coffee or Costa coffee? If I don't do that, I can afford to buy organic coffee at home. So, okay, I'm losing the social aspect because going out and having a coffee with friends is a nice positive thing to do. And we also need to be nice and positive as human beings. This isn't meant to be stressing us out even more, but it's always a balance with things. That's what I always say to people. I will always have organic coffee because I'm a coffee head and I love drinking coffee. Don't take that away from me. So I will spend more money on organic coffee. And then when I go out, then that's my choice. Okay, am I going to buy that? It's not organic. The thing with food also, it's really tricky. I personally don't buy everything organic because, let me give you an example. Do I want to buy organic fruit that's been flown in from Europe? Or do I want to buy local vegetables that were produced within like 10 miles of my house that are not organic, but they didn't come on a plane? They weren't packaged in plastic. So you always just look at things are never that black and white with things. So I would choose locally produced food over organic imported food, just for an example.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good little practical tip.
Yeah.
Farmers markets, things like that.
Right. And I look now and think, like apples, I want my apples from England. Okay, they're not organic. Well, then they're probably not organic because over here we've got very, very strict rules to get organic certification on the soil. To be honest, those apples probably are organic. It's just that they haven't got their soil certification because it's so, complicated. So I would rather have those apples than apples flown in from New Zealand. Why would I do that when we have apples here? Just things like that. And again, it's different for everyone, depending on what country you're in, where you live, where your local stores are. But it's for me, it's very difficult to talk about greening your business without talking about actually greening your life, your lifestyle, because it's connected, isn't it? A quick one as well to think about is like your home office, what your cleaning products are. Most cleaning products end up down the toilet or down the sink. They will end up in the waterways. They'll end up in the rivers. And again, most people know this already, but that affects wildlife. It can kill wildlife. It has impacts on, it's making the water polluted, basically. I was discovered literally last week. I use eco-friendly cleaning products. Over here, we've got quite a few companies that do that. So they're biodegradable and they don't have harmful chemicals in them. But there's a company called Tesano who they're basically making, it's stabilized aqueous ozone. It's basically oxygenated water that you clean with. and that's it. There's nothing else in it. So I fell on the floor when I saw that, thinking, what? Like, they've tested, it will kill germs, it will clean anything. And I'm like, why do we all not have this? Okay, it's really, really expensive.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure when they came out with a bunch of cleaners, when through, I don't know when most cleaners came out, but I'd imagine through the industrial age and then through like 40s, 50s, and 60s when products were at mass, I would imagine it was like, what can we make that is going to get the biggest reach? Like my wife is big in that movement of some different cleaners, mainly just for the aspect of like less toxins in the home. But that makes sense that would, if there's toxins in your stuff in your home, then it makes sense that the toxins are going to be in the trash and then in the ground and in the rivers where they go.
Right.
So
exactly. So next one is travel. So one of the biggest ways most companies reduce emissions and be more sustainable is reduce travel. Not always possible for us, working mainly remotely. Travel isn't one of our biggies to really look at, but it's just say you had an action plan for your business of what you were going to do. You would you'd reduce your flying to clients. There will be some people who may fly to visit big clients. Do you need to do that 4 times a year? Can you reduce it to twice a year? Or can you tie it in with another meeting? Just being mindful of, are you just traveling for the sake of it, or is it a really necessary journey? For
my
myself,
advice is for everyone should just have at least 3 kids like me, and then traveling is not happening barely at all.
Because it takes too long to get everyone in the car.
That, and it's just like, I can't leave my wife to take care of everybody for several nights in a row. So we're just going to do a Zoom meeting. We're doing a workshop.
Yeah. So I think for our audience today, like, travel isn't such a biggie, but I know, I've spoken to clients who they would have traveled flying to visit clients. Now they just reduce it and do it less. So another thing to just consider is this idea of compliance, because right now businesses aren't really being legally made to do these things, but it's only a matter of time before all businesses will need an environmental policy, a sustainability policy. They'll need to do their carbon footprinting. They'll need to demonstrate what they're doing. So this won't come like next week, but it is coming.
Well, I was even thinking, we did an episode recently, which is one of the most popular on the podcast, about getting grant funding. Yes. And I would imagine if you have a green policy in place, even honestly, just what we've covered here and the checklist that you're going to provide, if you have that and you say, these are the things I'm actively working on, that's going to also put you in a much better position to get grant funding for your business.
That's absolutely on the list. It puts you just that, and this isn't about being competitive, better than anyone else, but it's about, if you have a choice of companies and one's going green, they're on their journey, and one isn't, which one are you going to choose? A lot of this is in the UK anyway. If you are, say, a larger web design agency and you're putting tenders in, you will probably have to, well, you do actually now in the UK kind of have to have some sort of sustainability element in your business plan, or you're not considered for larger tenders. Now, I know that doesn't affect everyone. Sole trader web designers probably over the top. But if you're growing and scaling, and that's where you're aiming, that, because I'm involved in supporting clients with their tendering process, I produce their sustainability piece to the business plan. You're going to be starting to lose out. So this is about, you don't have to do it now, but why not start thinking about it now for the future of your business? You don't want to be losing out because you just didn't get this in place. And it isn't that complicated to get started.
Yeah, a lot of this seems quite common sense, but some of the things that are really common sense and easy to take in are also easy to forget, or just, again, a lot of this too is just, if it's out of sight, it's out of mind. But this has been quite eye-opening for me to think of it, just as a really good reminder of, mainly for me, digital storage. That's one of my biggest takeaways here. Is I had no idea. I just looked up separately. Not that I didn't believe you, Adela, but I did look up the data center thing, and that is wild.
Have a look later. I mean, Yeah,
Yeah,
grab a cup of
and
organic
again,
coffee and have a look.
yeah. So the non-green web designer is going to fly to a client with a briefcase of papers. They're going to have
Instant
non-organic
coffee.
stuff and sending over video files, and
Yep,
then yeah,
and littering.
yeah,
And then so the
yeah, and then
last
littering outside the plane. Yep.
and then the last tip, so number 10 that I just pulled out was remembering to showcase like your green credentials to attract new clients. So again, my experience is in the UK mainly, but green businesses are looking for other green businesses, and clients and customers have a preference for green businesses. So it's another good. I mean, personally, I think everyone wants to do their bit for the planet. They all know deep down somewhere that we have an obligation to protect the earth because we need it to survive. But a lot of what I'm seeing here is green businesses attract other green businesses, and then clients and customers want green businesses. So it all works together really nicely. And then
the cool thing is too with this, it's like, it's not even like political affiliations or anything like that with this. It's like, if you just say like you are doing what you can with your little business as a web designer for the environment, that should be cool for everyone. I definitely, it's funny because anything environmental, I've never quite understood how that's been polarized politically, when it's like, yeah, like you just said, the place that we live in, we should probably make sure we freaking take care of it. So this all makes great sense to me.
We forget it. And actually what I'm seeing, and, I'm in the thick of it, is what we're really talking about is a disconnect that people, humans have, as a race, have forgotten that our survival is intrinsically connected to the planet's health. So our health and well-being is absolutely connected to the planetary health and well-being. That's really what the message is at the core of all of this, is we've forgotten. And a lot of it is because we're in our screens all the time. We've forgotten. So it's like my passion is just getting people to, okay, let me write your action plan for you and get that done. Right now, get back out into nature, do some breathing, do some meditating, be a good person, remember who you are. That to me is what I'm really passionate about.
Well, a lot of this, Adela, has yeah. A lot of this has been just really good practical reminders too. So I really appreciate you. Really educating me on some of this too, and just making me think about, like, maybe if I post a 2 gigabyte video on Drive to submit it in somewhere, I just need to remember to delete it and not have it suck up storage for everyone's good. So this has been great. I know we got just a couple minutes left. So where would you like people to go, Adela? I think you have this as like an official download for people, right? Sure. Where should folks go after this?
There's a free download that will have those tips. And we've also got some tips on building green websites, which are connected obviously with what we've been talking about. I've got some quick ways to basically save, it's a sum up of all the things that you can save for your business with, say, building, faster sites, for example. Maybe we talk about that another time. Saving time and energy, saving your client base when you've got clients who maybe are moving away because they want to be looking for a green web designer or a green web design agency. Saving money on supplies, by reducing your printing, your paper. And then your favorite, saving money on data storage, which, saving money on reducing energy, saving money on like reducing your equipment purchases, saving money, reducing driving, saving fuel. And I don't know, you probably don't realize how much fuel costs over here in the UK compared to where you are.
It's fluctuated pretty drastically. Yeah, it's not as bad as it was a while ago, but election year, how coincidentally, gas prices always fluctuate in election years. So we'll see.
That's another conversation.
It must be completely unrelated. But.
And then really, it's just remembering like why we're doing all of this is to save the planet ultimately, because we're a growing population. We're having a massive impact on the planet. And this digital transformation we're in, I mean, it is revolutionizing things, but it has got a little bit, out of control. So it's this idea of being sustainable with what we're doing. It's not about, sustainability isn't about stopping growth or stopping us doing things. It's just about doing things in a sustainable way, which, is being mindful about what we're doing.
I love it. That's great, Adela. I think that is an awesome message to end off here. And again, I appreciate hearing the foundation of all this for you, which is huge. So this has been really great. We'll make sure we have everything linked, and I'll have all those resources linked in there. So this is cool, Adela. I haven't really talked to you about this stuff. I knew it was your background, but it's kind of cool to see. This is obviously your passion over something like CSS.
These things come around. Yeah. Thank you, Josh.
So maybe your web design journey was needed because now you're able to actually probably make a bigger impact with this passion of yours, having spent a lot of time in this industry.
Exactly that. It's being in the industry, being able to understand it for sure.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Adela, thank you for your time. Thank you for all you do. And this has been really cool. Eye-opening, something different. So I feel a little more cultured and educated after this one. Got me thinking. I'm going to go drive and
now.
Yeah, I'm going to go over to my drive folder and clear some stuff out. How's that sound? Awesome. Thanks, Adela.
Thank you.
Again, friends, I hope you enjoyed this one. If you are kind of like me, where you're a bit in the dark or just unaware of some things we can do practically as far as being a green web design business, I hope this gave you some good ideas. It's definitely made me be more proactive on particularly data storage, and it just feels kind of good to clear things out. So I'm actually in the process of doing some of that myself. And we covered a lot of links here, and Adela does have a free guide for you. You can get that at the show notes for this episode at joshhall.co/333. Should be an easy one to remember. joshhall.co/333. There you'll also find a full transcription for this episode. And again, the resource that Adela has for you to check out. And you can check Adela out at jackdahldigital.com, which again will be linked over at the show notes at joshhall.co/333. All right, friends, I hope you enjoyed this one. We'd love to hear from you if you'd like to leave a comment over at the show notes. And make sure you subscribe to the podcast because we've got some doozies up ahead. I'm so pumped. I hope you're pumped as well. So let's have some fun together, shall we? Go to the show notes, joshhall.co/333 for all the goodies on this one. Cheers, friends.